My name is Kristina Larsson. I'm the head of the Orphan office at the agency. And I'm going to talk about the comp. And you're very fortunate because I understand you've already done an exercise with a mini comp that we were going to talk about a little bit later this afternoon. So, and you also have at least one member in the auditorium here who has gone through this procedure, actually, of designation of a product, which is very interesting, and I've already had some comments and questions. So basically, this is actually an old picture from the old building. So you might be aware that last summer, the whole agency moved about, 150 meters from one building to the other in the same area. This is the old building, but this is the comp. So it's a little bit like you're sitting now. The committee meets and they usually look at each other instead of looking at someone at the front, which is quite much nicer. So the comp is, as the other committees at the agency, consists of one member from each member state, and currently that's 28. Then, as we already heard, there are 3 patient representatives here, and they have been involved from the beginning. It's in the legislation that the patient representatives should be part of the comp. And we also have 3 members that are appointed by the European Commission on the recommendation from the agency. And those members are usually there as either a sort of a liaison with another committee, or because they have a very specific expertise that the comp requires. Then, obviously, we have a member from Norway and Iceland as well, but they cannot vote because it's only European Union members of the working or the committees that can vote. There is one chair, he's called Bruno, he's from Portugal, and the vice chair of the comp is called Leslie Green, and she is also a patient representative. So the comp has several responsibilities. So it's not only the designation of medicinal products or orphan designations, but it's actually to help out through protocol assistance when the sponsor is trying to develop the product. The very specific question that the comp responds to is the one on significant benefit. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. Actually, one thing missing here, and I borrowed this slide, apparently it's been used for many years, and I recognize there is nothing here about the marketing authorization procedure. And of course, when the company comes for marketing authorization, the comp has to reassess whether it still fulfills the criteria for orphan designation. Otherwise, you won't give the incentives and the market exclusivity. So that's a really big point, and I definitely have to update this slide. The comp also has the remit to assist the Commission with guidelines and helping them with new, sort of interpreting the regulation. And currently, there is a revision ongoing for one of the major documents from the committee and the Commission on how to interpret the legislation. It's the communication from 2003, so it definitely needs a bit of update. And for that particular document, there will actually be a public consultation during the autumn, so everybody will be able to comment on how to interpret this legislation. So what are the main criteria for the orphan designation? So it's for prevention or diagnostics or treatment of medicinal products. And I use the syringe there to show you that. Maybe a bit strange, but that's the case. Then you can, the legislation also says that you can actually come at any time during your development. I have to say that that has proven a little bit tricky because you also have to show that your product has some sort of medical plausibility. And just the idea, a good idea, is not really enough for the comp to be able to designate the product. But you do have to have some data with it as well. And currently, the comp would like to have data in a relevant model of the condition. That could be in vitro data, it could be animal models. Sometimes companies, if they're bigger, come at a much later stage. They will have a lot of clinical data even when they come. But the legislation says any time. It's also for free, this whole procedure, which is very good. And anyone, it doesn't have to be a big company, asking for the designation. It could be small companies, but it could also be a single person, a single sponsor. But the person has to be within the EEA. So it's European Union, including Norway, Liechtenstein, and Iceland. So you have to be registered here. And then, obviously, I think the most important thing are the incentives. So the incentives to get the designation is usually, because, well, some people say it's good because you can get funding for it. For example, for some of you in academia may have been interested in the Horizon 2020, which is a big project from the European Commission and the Parliament to try and emphasize and sponsor clinical research in orphan diseases. And for that, you need an orphan drug designation. And once you have the designation, you can also apply for protocol assistance, which is scientific advice, but you get the fee reduced or waived depending on the size of your company. The major thing, obviously, is when you get to the market and you have an orphan product, it's confirmed at the time marketing authorization, you get a 10-year market exclusivity for your product, which means that no similar products can enter the market, and any other new products for that type of same disease and same condition would have to show that they are of significant benefit over your product that is on the market. And that's obviously the main incentive. So there are a few criteria to have your product designated. Obviously, it has to be a rare disease, and in Europe, that's less than 5 in 10,000. It's been decided. It can be 0, it can be up to 5. Anywhere close to 5 is usually a big discussion, because how do you really know it's under 5 in 10,000? Sometimes you have a lot of data on it, sometimes very sparse, and then it's a difficult discussion. The disease should be serious or life-threatening or chronically debilitating. And if there are alternative methods, and we'll come back to that very soon, you would have to show that your product would be of significant benefit over the ones already on the market. So this is the actual procedure, if you ever want to go through it. I would recommend everybody to start with a pre-submission meeting. If you haven't gone through this procedure before, it's when you get very good help from the agency and my colleagues, my team, to put together the document. So you ask for this meeting, you submit your document, you discuss, and then once everything has been cleared, you submit the final application. You go through, well, then in that case, it's rather informal validation, and then the procedure starts. So once the procedure starts, we call that the evaluation phase. We write a summary report, which is then discussed by the COMP, the Committee of Orphan Medicinal Products, and at that stage, they would decide whether they completely agree with what you're proposing, and you will just get stamped, yes, you're now an orphan medicinal product. And if the committee agrees, then it will be sent to the commission, and then they will accept as well. If we have questions, there might be some concerns. Maybe you haven't really shown there are other questions about the animal model, maybe. How are you showing your significant benefit? Is the prevalence really under 5 in 10,000? You will be sent a list of questions instead, and invited to come to an oral explanation to discuss with the committee. And then once that has all been clarified, and if the committee then agrees with you, then the procedure will be finalized and the commission will be sort of stamping it. Occasionally, it does happen that you don't have enough, maybe, data. Maybe there are concerns about the models you're using. Maybe they would like to have a little bit more information on the medical plausibility. Then you can either have a negative opinion, which will be published. Very few companies actually choose that, or sponsors, or you can withdraw and come back at a later stage. And most applicants choose to withdraw and just come back a little bit later when they have the data that was required. Yes?
Now we have to wait to the end.
For me, we can ask now. Yeah.
Okay, possibly this is a very stupid question or opening a box of Pandora, but how does it work with patents in this? Because, for example, if you know somebody has a patent on a certain approach, but you know they're not doing anything with it, they just patented it, I don't know, 15 years ago and not developing. And you're developing something, how can you pre-submit, or are you then excluded from pre-submission because some other group who's doing nothing with their approach has patented it?
Well, I have to say that we actually usually don't look into, it's not the remit of the COM or the EMA to look into the patents. And it may very well happen that there are some people who ask for a designation. It is not, we would not exclude a product because there was a patent somewhere. Hoping that through your development, maybe you will have a discussion then, because patents are usually anyway national. So it may very well be that the patent is only in one country, and you may be able sort of to develop it in a different way. But I'm not entirely sure, but we would never stop a product because there was a patent.
Because you're saying you get market exclusivity, so you'd think there's kind of...
Yes.
Because doesn't work all through. Well, because you said you get market exclusivity if you get the designation, you get a 10-year market exclusivity, so you'd think that would sort of be in contradiction with the patenting, I don't know.
No, not necessarily. The patents usually have a sort of a different type of life than the marketing authorization procedures. So even though someone would have a patent, I think you would on a sort of a national basis would have to solve the problem, but the patent would probably not be applicable to, and it depends on what the type of patent it is as well. You also sometimes have patents once you have your product marketed, and then companies sometimes choose to extend the patent instead of choosing market exclusivity. But that's up to the applicant at the time to decide whether it's best for them to secure the patent or whether the exclusivity is better.
Is that understood? One of you, the difference between the patent system and the protection. What does it mean protection when patent versus market exclusivity, which is totally different and complementary? You understand the difference?
When we talk about orphan drug, it's a single molecule or it could be a combination of different molecules?
Well, it's very rarely we have sort of fixed combinations, but one molecule, it can obviously be cell-based therapy, which then means several different type of cells. So, but it has to be one product is actually what the legislation says. It's a bit difficult.
And then the application has to be only one condition, or it could apply to a family of conditions?
No, it would, every single application would only be for one condition. So if you had several that you wanted to apply for, then you would have to apply separately for each of those. Okay? So we've had a steady increase in the numbers of both submissions and procedures. Not strange, I think that everybody sees the same. Last year there was a big rise, and we think that was because of this Horizon 2020, when a lot of academia came to us as well to have the designations. So let's go back to the significant benefit. This is a very interesting concept. It's only applied in Europe. No other, the FDA does not have this, the concept of significant benefit. But, so the legislation says that if there are satisfactory methods, and we could probably discuss for an hour or many hours what a satisfactory method is, then you would have to show that your product would be of significant benefit versus other products. If there are no satisfactory methods, maybe there are no products approved at all, then there is no problem, you don't have to show significant benefit. The significant, well, maybe we should stop. So satisfactory method currently is regarded as licensed medicinal products. So not off-label use. That's usually not regarded as satisfactory because because the whole idea is basically to get products that are properly studied and licensed for the indications. This is one of the basic ideas behind the whole regulation. So to define, well, significant benefit is defined either as a clinically relevant advantage or a major contribution to patient care. And maybe we can save it for a bit later to discuss sort of what would it be. I mean, clinical relevant advantage, we can discuss that maybe in the later sessions. So then, once you have your designation, you develop your product, at the time of marketing authorization, you have to confirm that your product is still meets those criteria. That the condition still needs to be under 5 in 10,000. It does happen that they go above, mostly because we get much better treatments. Maybe because we have more registries actually registering the data. So then you have to, the applicant has to submit a maintenance report, and the comp will reevaluate whether the product meets the criteria. Is it of significant benefit? Maybe that was not an issue. If the CHMP then gives a positive opinion, then it would be acceptable. If the comp decides that actually this product has not shown enough information, not enough data to be sure that this is of significant benefit, they can remove the condition from the registry. Now, that does not mean that your product will not come to the market, because you can still come to the market. You just will not have the 10-year market exclusivity and be ticked off as an orphan product. So these were at the end of the year, the dates. So we actually had 100 products designated by the end of the year, which is quite nice. Then obviously that this is an ongoing process, so now we have more. I think it's 104 or 5 or something like that. But they come all the time. We see more and more of them, which is very nice. So my conclusions here would be that orphan designation obviously is centralized in the EU. The application has to be submitted to the EMA. It's completely free of charge. And sometimes, in most cases actually, I think about 7%, you would have to show that your product is of significant benefit. And then maybe I should say a few words about the Scientific Advice Working Party. So because I was asked to do that as well. So the Scientific Advice Working Party is not a committee as such. They deal with questions from applicants on the development of the medicinal product. And it does not have to be an orphan product, any type of development they deal with. Anything from quality, so you know how to manufacture your product, or the non-clinical development, or the clinical development. And in essence, the comp is involved when the company asks questions about the significant benefit. So you could, during a protocol assistance, actually ask the comp, if I develop my product like this, will it then be acceptable for significant benefit? The comp will then answer and say, yes, this may be acceptable. However, we would like you to take this product into account, for example. We would like you to consider that type of endpoint because it might be easier to show you the major contribution to patient care. So it's really, really good and important to do that. Just one thing about, before I let maybe Fernando talk a little bit more about the scientific advice. It is a working party of the CHMP, so the Committee of Human Medicinal Products, and it's not based on member states, as all the other committees are. So the committees are member state based, but the Scientific Advice Working Party is only based by expertise. So there is a sort of framework of what type of expertise should be in the working party. We have a mandate where it's specified, and then the member states can appoint or not appoint, they ask for specific members to be part of this working party. I think currently there's I don't know how many members, so 33 members or something like that with alternates. And yeah, because the working party also has alternates and everybody's there. So it's a huge group when they meet every month. They meet for sort of almost 4 days every month because they have so many procedures. But it's a very, very interesting group to be working with because they have all this expertise. But obviously, there are some member states that are very unrepresented in this, and we have some. Usually, the bigger member states have more members on the committee. Or how interested are you in this? So that's sometimes it's a question. Sort of, why are there not members from this country in the Scientific Advice Working Party? Usually because we haven't had anyone interested from that particular country. Do you want to talk more about the scientific advice? Or yeah, you can.
Hello. On the exercise, one of the criteria to grant orphan designation is the condition of distinct medical entity. Yeah. I still haven't found the definition of that.
So there is, well, there is no actual definition. We do have a document where it specifies, and I'm not really good at this, one of my colleagues, if it has to have some sort of histological characteristics, it has to be recognized as a condition in classifications, for example. It is quite difficult. We have some very difficult discussions whether it is a condition or not, or if it's a syndrome, or if it's a stage of a disease. So there's a lot of discussions ongoing, which I think that, well, especially the academia would be very, very interested in, and the patient representatives as well. But I think patient representatives usually, they have more of a defined condition, and we usually accept that. But then we have all these stages of diseases, or is it, what do we designate? Usually the comp would like to designate the underlying condition and not a symptom. In your case, for the exercise, I think it's pretty clear. But we have a lot of maybe. Yeah. So, for example, personally, I'm also slightly confused. Sometimes I have to say, the idea is not to sort of, we have a website, salami slice, we call salami slice conditions, because then you could probably get any disease to become orphan if you just choose a specific population. That's also why the conference decided not to use biomarkers, because if you would go into biomarker, then you could have all cancers absolutely designated as orphan products. I mean, of course, there are non-small cell lung cancer patients with this particular gene defect or specific biomarker, and there are very few of them in the whole world. Personally, apparently, they seem to be possible to develop those products anyway. And then I guess that the whole the idea behind the orphan legislation is obviously to get products to the market that otherwise wouldn't come. And in oncology, and specifically, they seem to be coming anyway, and they seem to be, reaching the patients if they're not charging too much for them. But so that's the idea, sort of, to try and have a broader condition for the designation. And usually, when they come from marketing authorization anyway, the indication they get, the treatment indication, will be much narrower. It will usually say that it is patients who have failed this and that, and it's very rare that they actually, it's usually only when you have a completely new product for a disease where there are no other products. Otherwise, it will say, you will have failed this and that, and this is the third-line treatment, and that's the condition, and the indication, and then it would absolutely fall within the orphan condition anyway.
Is this working? Oh. Yeah, just a question in relation to the salami slicing. Are you seeing a trend in is that better? Are you seeing a trend in terms of application where there is this attempted salami slicing, and how do you deal with that as a committee?
Well, if it's a trend, I think we've had it for a long time. There are always sponsors coming to try and defend why their product would only work in a certain area, certain patient population. There are occasions where the committee will accept, and the legislation, or the communication in this case, actually does say that if your product will only work in that particular patient population, you would be able to get it designated. Now, it's very, very difficult to prove that, because you would have to show the committee that your product does not work in the others. And how do you do that? You do huge clinical trials involving those patients where your product will not work, and that's the only way sort of to show that it won't work. But otherwise, we would always wonder it could be used in a broader population. So that's also the reason sort of why this salami slicing is not used a lot and try to broaden the conditions.